I'm always in the middle, so I just don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:04. It's September 17th, 2019. It's the Auburn Conservation Commission. We're going to start with roll call. Down there.
Sam Boss.
Jane Costello,
Jordan Tate.
Rihanna LaRose,
Michelle Malonio.
And Tony Collier.
And Tiz is out of the state, so she has an excused absence. Moving forward, we're going to go ahead and review and approve the July minutes. The August minutes are going to be postponed until October. So if there are any edits or suggestions or additions to the July minutes, go ahead and bring those forth now.
I motion that we pass the July minutes as written.
Second.
All those in favor?
I was not here, so
That's
it's a
fine.
little bit odd for
Yeah.
me.
That's fine. You can abstain.
I will abstain then, I suppose. Unless, yeah.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. And then Tiz is absent. Does that count as a quorum still? As a majority?
Yeah.
Item
this
6.
is 4.
Okay, perfect. All right, so public comment, guest visitors, we don't have any of those. So we can, right? Okay. We can address that if people come in, but moving forward, we're completed. So last night, first there was the joint meeting with the planning board. We were all present for that except for Tiz, in which we discussed the timber harvest for the shoreland zoning and bringing Auburn's ordinance in line with state standards. So there were 3 options for that. Fully adopt it and have the state enforce and monitor. There was a adopt it with potential for tweaking, and Auburn would be responsible for enforcement. And then the last one is that Auburn Auburn kind of brings their own standards up to be in line with the state, but without adopting state standards, and they would have enforcement responsibility entirely on themselves. Based on the discussions of the meeting, it kind of sounded like everyone was leaning towards option number 1, to just fully adopt the state and have them be responsible for enforcement. I guess I wasn't exactly sure where we were supposed to go moving forward with that, if we're supposed to vote on tonight our decision either way and what to recommend.
I was also curious about
My
that because it
understanding
seemed pretty
is that-
ambiguous.
Yeah, my understanding is that we were supposed to, both planning board and conservation, have the opportunity to discuss after that
Right.
meeting on our feelings. I think because I sent something to you and Jane about a couple thoughts that I wanted this group to really think about, and I'm not saying either or. I fully support the fact that we do not have the staff resources to man this ordinance, and it is a very good possibility that the best interest might be to adopt the state fully. But I was also looking at trying to compare the current ordinance with the state ordinance, and what are the differences, and then think about why. Was that in place for a reason? Was it just we did our own thing as Auburn? But some of the big differences I noticed, so if we did do a full-on, for instance, the state kicks in at the 2-acre limit. Auburn kicks in at about 0.91 acres, I think that was the math. Did anybody double check my math on that? Because it was like a 20,000 square foot thing, 40,000 square foot thing. So in that respect, Auburn's current ordinance is more stringent than the state. It kicks in at 0.91 acres. The state wouldn't kick in until you cleared 2 acres. So there was some differences there that I thought maybe to just entertain the idea that option 2 where we adopt state standards, but then Auburn would be a little more stringent. Another big one was the water shore thing. I think I sent it to you guys too. I should have just copied the whole group, but I felt like you guys were kind of lost. So again, Auburn right now, their shoreland ordinances kick in at about 100 feet and 75 feet, depending, give or take, what you're looking at for development or clear cutting or whatnot. And then another example is the state would kick in at 250 feet. So 250 feet would be your high water mark on your shoreland. So therefore, the state would be more stringent on 250 have to bring Auburn up to that more stringent code. So I saw some differences there, for better or worse, if we adopt the state ordinance that actually lacks on some of the current Auburn ordinance. It actually makes us a little more lax, but just throwing that out there to have discussion and think, do we even want to go there, or we just want to adopt the whole state? Again, who manages that, who has the resources? We have never in the city of Auburn, and I want to reiterate this, I really kick myself for not speaking up a little bit more, but we had very limited time too, so I didn't want to continue that conversation, but we have never, not just today, because we don't have a forester full-time, but we have never had that capacity to enforce that shoreline ordinance.
Well, that's what I
Even
was
with a
gonna
half,
ask.
yeah,
Is-
even when we had half-time or even a full-time position, we still don't have the resources. We never have, we don't have them now.
So how have they been enforcing or
I
not
think-
this for these years prior?
And my understanding, and I am not 100% versed on this, I'm not a
And who's they?
forester,
Yes.
but there has been some issues that have come up over the last couple of years, and that's the only reason why I'm even familiar with what's going on vaguely even, is because I've had to go in there and I've actually curiously looked some of this stuff up for specific reasons. I'm not looking at the entire city. Like, there were issues of some people clear cutting, you know, in near bodies of water. I questioned it. I thought, oh, nobody's paying attention. So I looked to see if there were ordinances. Now, several months ago, 5 months ago, Tiz, it's unfortunate she's not here, but she sits on the Water Protection Commission, and I reached out to her, like I said, 4 or 5 months ago, and I asked about that shoreland water ordinance, because it is posted and part of the website and what they work on. But they're only looking at the Lake Auburn watershed too, so remember that this shoreland ordinance also is bodies of water. So you're not just looking at a Great Lake or Taylor Pond, a great pond, but it also talks about the tributaries that come out that run through and feed into these great ponds. So we're talking, you know, the Androscoggin, we're talking Little Androscoggin, possibly Taylor Brook,
Royal.
possibly, yep, the Royal, even the Logan Brook watershed that's nobody really familiar with, but it's part of like where Center Street goes into the Walmart area. If you drive where the new overpass is by the old Best Buy, there's some ditches you'll see that are built up with rocks. That's because that is an underground, huge, vast network of aquifers that are all connected to that watershed area. A lot of people aren't familiar. So, yeah, so that's not necessarily a shoreland per se, but they treat a lot of it like that because it still runs off into that watershed area, which feeds a vast area. So that's only because, like I said, I'm familiar knowing that this existed. Most people don't know this existed until there's an issue, you know? A lot of times people are looking at this because you have like a junkyard, you know, like Washington Street. We won't name any names, but there are junkyards where if you paddle the river like me and Jordan do frequently, we see trash and things falling down in the river, tires, cars. And occasionally the city gets called, and they've been out there numerous times. So sometimes things come up and they will bring that shoreland ordinance into play sometimes. So I'm just trying to open dialogue. I'm not saying either or.
I'd like a little bit more clarification,
Yeah.
because with option 2, there was the ability for the state to come in and enforce. It wasn't clear, based on my memory of the discussion, it sounds like it wouldn't necessarily be all the time. And I kind of want to have clarification on what enforcements there would be from the state for option 2, and also given the mapping efforts. I think with option 2, they also said we would be provided the maps that show all of the buffers and where they apply,
Right.
and it's all color coded and everything, because that would be a huge effort also for Auburn to provide the staffing and the time to create all those maps and have to update them every time, you know, there was potentially any changes at the state level. So I just guess I'd like a little bit more clarification on the support that would come from the state under option 2, if that's something that Auburn wanted to explore. I think I would also be in support of option 1 if it was pretty overwhelming from the rest of, you know, the city of Auburn and other entities as well, like the planning board, I wouldn't be strongly opposed, but I do see that there are potential benefits where Auburn may be more stringent in some cases for option 2. So I guess maybe just some clarification on what support would come from the state for that.
The one thing I would say, and I really appreciate you, Rihanna, doing the work of digging into the differences, because I started to go, I printed them both out, like started looking through the 30 pages of state regulations, and then you compare that to Auburn, which is 2 pages. So I appreciate you doing that work. The only thing I would say is that options 1 and 2 both assume the imposition of state standards. It's just different enforcement. So even if we adopted one of those first 2 options, it would still come down to, who's really doing the enforcement. It wouldn't be a matter of who actually gets to make the call about the number of feet or
I think option 2,
other
they
issues.
said we could make small changes in the ordinance, I thought.
And they would still
And that's why
enforce it.
enforcement might be tricky, because if Auburn changes something that's not to the state can't enforce something that's not in their standards. So
Okay.
that was my interpretation, I could be wrong, I would have to go back through and get clarifications on like what the written options were.
Okay.
But I think that was part of option 2, is we could tweak some of it, but whatever we tweaked, Auburn would be responsible for enforcing.
So I had a
So that's-
similar kind of
yeah.
sense as you did, that it was basically about, that option 2 was also just basically state options. And I'm also trying to remember, at the end, he addressed this whole thing, like when a certain number of communities
reach
adopt
mass
them,
standards.
then they essentially become mandatory. Don't they at a certain point become mandatory for all?
Right, if they reach the critical mass, which was a certain number of certain ranking towns, and I remember the planning board chair, Evan, had asked if Auburn was one of those towns that would contribute to critical mass, and I don't think that there was a clear answer. But yes, once they do reach critical mass is when basically it becomes enclosed for all the municipalities that didn't choose ahead of time.
Here we go. So option 1 was under option 1, the Bureau of Forestry will administer and regulate all forestry activities within the municipality of that shoreline. Option 2 allows the municipality to retain some local control, the administration and enforcement of timber harvesting and shoreland while receiving assistance from the expertise of
But there's nothing there
forestry.
about tweaking it, isn't it?
Well, I guess
Well,
that's what I
that
thought
is part,
control
I mean, I
meant.
could read the whole thing, but that is
Yeah.
part of that. And then option 3 is to retain the current standards of Auburn.
Well, I would.
by the municipality.
I should have the
Absolutely.
language in front of me, but based on what you read, Rian, I think there are different ways you can interpret that.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be either you
It's someone
administer
controlling.
the state standards as they're written, or you administer it and kind of decide, if you want to add local standards. And my sense from listening to Audrey was that it would be a challenging negotiation to figure
Right.
out who's going to do what if the enforcement is shared. And I find that to be, the concern I have with that is that you could have both parties thinking the other one is
Yeah,
doing it,
and then
and nobody really does the
And that's
enforcement.
why I wanted clarification on exactly what that shared responsibility would be, because things could absolutely fall through the cracks in that scenario, and there could be different interpretations. So I think it could be messy under option 2 if it's not laid out very clearly ahead of time.
And I wanted to hear from some more foresters. I forwarded some stuff to Bill and David, and just to kind of get their take on it. David sent us a response, right? He forwarded that around. If everybody remembers, there were 3 comments. David really, as a forester, suggested that we do adopt the state in its entirety, because most foresters are pretty familiar with state regulations anyway, and it does get sketchy when the state comes in to override municipality or whatever. So because they were very familiar with those dimensions, those types of clearing, those types of administrative things and engineering controls that have to be put in place when you're going out there to do your harvest. So that was his big thing, and not to confuse that. And he also supported the fact that enforcement is a big issue, and that the state, would take care of that. We don't have the funds or resources in our way to enforce it. So we set this gorgeous, grandiose ordinance in place if we're not enforcing it now, which was part of our feedback too, with the agricultural zone and other things that we're working on, then what validity do we have in making this ordinance if we can't enforce it and have resources? So,
That's,
I mean,
yeah.
Griswold's piece is pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
we should just go with option one.
yeah.
I mean,
Just
I
as a-
kind of defer to him just because like, I figured, well, he knows the state logging and forestry rules better than I certainly do.
The one piece that I was a little confused on, so this is referring to timber harvesting
In the
and
shoreline.
for forest products for the shoreland.
Right.
Forest products, does that have to be commercial forest products, or can that just be
Private.
timber harvesting for yourself, for your own personal use? And you don't have to have a professional forester do this
As long
necessarily.
as it's within that 2 acre, which
Right.
is what the state
Right.
says.
So there is still a real education issue, because if I'm just a private landowner living in the shoreland and I have to decipher 30 pages of DBH and, you know, the sight lines and all of that stuff, I think there's still a real issue with being able to navigate that as opposed to, you know, 2 pages of a city ordinance. So while I'm totally supportive of adopting the state standards, it would be really nice if we could get them to provide some support for individuals who may not be licensed foresters to have that education and what that looks like.
You know what I would love is I think that would be a great opportunity to collaborate with Lewis and Auburn Community Forest Board and maybe host a workshop like they did with the invasive species.
Yeah.
And some kind of educational workshop where, you know, maybe there's like a classroom component and then a field component where they go out and they kind of just give you a better visual. I think that would be a really great opportunity to work with Forest Board, do some education outreach so that people are a little bit more aware proactively than, like you said, maybe reactively in
Yeah.
a situation.
And then we also have our timberland harvest for our woodlots.
For the public
which
woodlots,
Dave- That's
right.
right, which David worked very hard on. I mean, that thing is huge. So that's something to remember, that those are 2 separate pieces too. They may overlap in many ways because part of our woodlots could be pretty close to the watershed. Mount Appetite is a prime example. It's not necessarily shoreland, but you know, if it was any closer than Taylor Pond and you get to the very end of Mount Appetite, you are starting to look at some of that. But those are 2 separate things. So shoreland would supersede and come first, and then if you're outside the shoreland, you would look at that secondary best management practice, right? It's a BMP for timber harvest.
If I recall correctly, I almost think there are some other regulations that relate to shoreline, that basically you can only harvest a certain percentage, you know, within any given time period.
Yeah,
And so basically that in essence would provide some protection regardless of what was in option.
but I think if I remember correctly, it was up to 40% of your lot every 10 years. So you can
Of
only,
trees greater
yeah.
than.
That's
of
right,
age
then you
greater
have
than
to get
45
in-
inches. Or
right.
it could be 60 square foot basal area
Right.
of trees.
But again, I think the city ordinance said 4 inches, and then the state says 4.5 inches. So
Right.
what you're looking at, again, not to get everybody's head spinning, but there are differences between where you measure the tree from the base of the trunk and the ground, and then you take the circumference. So that's where that DVH and all that is coming from. So those are different. Again, foresters would be really versed in that.
Can't you accomplish the same thing by possibly supporting option 1, but with the local caveat that basically administratively often supply a contact person that basically could contact the state if anybody complained in reference on the if there was any problem, basically there'd be an automatic contact person that would automatically have responsibility to inform the state. And normally when there's a complaint, Forest Service gets right on it real quick.
And I think that's what option 2 is trying to say, is that we would still have their support, right?
I think we
Still
might be
have
able
some
to,
administrative control with their support.
so my comments on the joint meeting, I had suggested, so there's already a notification process, if I'm remembering correctly, that whenever someone's gonna be harvesting in the shoreland zone, that the code enforcement is notified of that municipality if we adopt option one. And so I wouldn't wanna change anything there, but if that could be shared with more than just the code enforcement officer, that notification, so like, we would just be aware that there's harvesting happening in the shoreline zone, we would be better equipped to maybe handle complaints or to make sure that those complaints are received by the Forest Service in a timely manner. That could still be, I think, available under option one if we request that that notification is not just to the code enforcement officer, but also shared with us. So, maybe that's a good option to kind of.
And then, to me, like in terms of contact with the state, is there, and maybe somebody's already said this, but is there some sort of a regional person or representative for our area that we would be
Yeah,
doing?
we mentioned that.
It would be
He said
okay.
it's actually, like, the person isn't all that busy.
There's 10 regional, I don't remember their term, but there's basically 10 regional
Okay.
forest rangers, I believe.
It's not like we're calling one office and not know who the person is that's
Right,
responsible.
no, and he said in the southern counties, it's pretty much almost the outline of your county for
Oh, right. That's right, I
the,
remember
for the
that.
forest ranger. It's a little bit different up north. So, yeah, we would have a regional forest ranger that we can contact, with any questions or complaints, or even if they, they could just check in, yeah. So that would, I imagine, be who we would establish contact with, we, the city of Auburn, not necessarily Conservation Commission.
And then no matter what, changing this ordinance, whether we adopt it or not, we'll make sure we educate the public, because I think that's kind of one of my pet peeves, is we have these like vague ordinances that a lot of people aren't aware of until they need it. And those that are working, foresters, Bill and David, is to let them know, hey, we have a change and there should be, some reasonable allotment of time, because if they're in the middle of a harvest right now, this is getting into fall and winter, and that's kind of when they do the harvest.
I'd like to comment.
Grandfather, I don't know, 90 days or something, or realize.
I'll share one thing I normally don't bring up professional experience. Basically, roughly half of our shoreland that's on the Androscoggin River, essentially, DEP authorized CMP to clear cut. So the river. Basically, that obviously was not acceptable to me, and basically, I contacted the city, they authorized Derek to get on it, and basically, even though they have DEP's authorization and CMP transmission was determined to go ahead, basically, the minute the city got involved, basically, they automatically stepped back and basically, Eric was able to utilize some tools, other tools, that basically took care of the problem. And so I'm, before, if there are serious questions, you might want to just check with Eric, but I suspect there are some other overlapping areas that if the city was notified, that their inquiry would accomplish quite a lot and basically would generate action at the state level quite quickly.
Just thinking about that issue, Morris, and thinking about your calling us to always think about unintended consequences, as I think about this ordinance, one thing I just would wonder is it possible to opt out? If we were to select option one and say we're going to adopt state standards, if in 10 years there's a different government that decides we want to allow more lax harvesting on shorelands, could we opt out of that and adopt our own ordinance again?
And how hard or difficult would that be at that point?
Basically, we could just act on it with the recommendation that we be assured that there are opt-out options.
Yeah.
And that way, our recommendation would be conditional on that option.
Could we put something in there that, let's say we agreed to take option one in its entirety with the speculation that will be reviewed by the municipality every 5 or 10 years or something? That way we put a little clause in there that we're letting them know we want the opportunity to review this every 5 or 10 years for possible change.
Yep, I like that.
First time that it's taken us 6 years to come to compliance, they may want to.
I know, right? Well, you know, it's like the damn licensing, you know, if you're really on top of it, you know what's coming. It's a long process, a big process, but if you know what's coming, you can sit on top of it. But at least if you kind of put that in there, they're aware that we want the opportunity to continue.
Yeah, I think that's good to have that conditional in there, and that lets them know we're not, we're gonna be paying attention to how it works. And may hopefully help to hold them accountable in the enforcement, and make sure that it's actually adhered to, so.
And then maybe if we do adopt number 1 as all its entirety and we do change, we're gonna make some adoptions here, our current.
So,
If we would find these issues and we have the opportunity to say, hey, we've tried this and it's our 5 years and we want to make it a little bit better.
I think that's great. I need to clarify with Audrey, because we're providing our recommendation to the city of Auburn on what they should opt for. Whether or not, when Auburn communicates with the, Maine Forest Service about their option, I don't know if they'll necessarily choose to take our recommendation of reviewing it every 5 years. So I just need to clarify with Audrey, who we're kind of reporting to on what Conservation Commission recommends. But I do have that we agree with option 1 in its entirety, with the ability for Auburn to review proposed changes to the ordinance and opt out if the municipality does not agree with proposed state standards. So changes in state standards, I should say. So I can forward that to Audrey and ask her, where it's really ultimately going to, like who's making the choice with the state. But if everyone's comfortable with that, I think it's a good place to.
Is that something that we would need to vote on? Are they gonna expect us to vote on this recommendation?
I don't know. I think that we kind of discussed it. We all seem to be in agreement, but if you'd be more comfortable with the vote, that's our official recommendation to the city of Auburn, that they push for that, we can do that.
Give it a little extra heft.
Yeah, yeah. I hate to see these things keep coming back because we didn't vote on them or we didn't.
Okay, so.
But I don't know that we need to.
Just
I'm
before
just
we-
throwing that out
What does it
there.
hurt if you do?
Before we take the vote, I'm not sure how into the weeds we're getting, but I just wanted to come back quickly to something Rihanna said about the education piece. Because to me, I think that's really critical. We're always talking about enforcement of when something goes wrong and how we're gonna crack down on, a situation where somebody didn't follow the ordinance, but I think the best solution is just to get better education before that happens. And to me, that's the biggest concern I have about the state standards, is that they're so complicated that it would be really easy for someone without meaning to violate them. So will the state be on the hook? Will they be able to provide that education? Will they provide some funding and some resources to do that?
Right. Based on the conversation from the joint meeting, it sounded like they were more education outreach oriented, but that kind of sounded like when it was in regards to a complaint, like, hey, here's what you should have done instead, here's what you could have done. So I do agree that there should be more proactive education and outreach. States are pretty good at that, and especially with the Forest Service, they have a lot of educational material that you send around sometimes. So I'm sure that's something that they would provide. I don't necessarily know if it's something we need to stipulate in our recommendation, but something that we would want to coordinate with them and maybe host a workshop or something like that with the Forest Board.
Well, when we put our recommendation out there, we also have, and our requests are, or our hopes are that, knowing we support this, our hopes are that there would be education, there would be a grace period moving into the new ordinance.
Right.
I don't know what that is, if it's 90 days, 120 days, 30 days, I have no idea. However long it takes to educate the public, they need to get that turned around.
Right.
And put a couple of those things in. We could put why we came up with this number 1. I think what I'm hearing is that we agree that the city cannot enforce the current ordinance. We don't
It
have
seemed
the
pretty clear based on what she was saying. She was saying how difficult it was for them to even understand.
Yeah, and even for us.
And then if there was a variance, it would fall on the planning board, and they don't have the ability, like the technical ability on the board either, to really adequately assess appeals or anything like that. So it definitely sounds like they prefer option 1.
So So I think Rina's suggestion makes a lot of sense. Let's just maybe take a vote to approve option 1, and then we can make some recommendations based on that.
Okay, did you want to make a motion?
Sure. I make a motion that we are in agreement possibly on accepting option 1, where the state of Maine forestry will adopt their ordinance in its entirety.
Can we get a second?
Of course.
Second?
All in favor? Great.
Can I interject?
Sure.
Soil and Water Conservation District over in Lewiston is always looking for new kinds of educational opportunities. And I'm sure they would be glad to promote and reach out and host something like this because it is conservation related.
Yeah.
So I
That's
can
a
get you
really
that
good
contact
point.
information
Yeah.
if you want, but
I think I'm connected with Josie if she's still there.
Kenzie.
She's not,
Kenzie.
it's Matt Duff now is the most
Matt Duff
recent.
is the
Oh, okay.
assistant. Mackenzie, I don't know what her last name is.
Okay.
She's supposed to be down at the farmer's market tomorrow, if you guys want to
Yeah, if
stop
you could
by.
forward that contact information, that'd be great, thank you. So that kind of went into a little bit of new business when we were discussing. So the old business was basically just that we had the meeting, moving forward with the work completed. So last night I went to the city council workshop. I was asked to be there with also planning board chair, in which we would present our recommendation for the MAG ARP, because that was the official presentation to the council of their findings. I ended up ad-libbing our letter a little bit. I think I pretty much got the point across. I would have liked to maybe be a little bit more concise in my message to the council, but I think I was still well heard. That moving forward, we both read off our findings, and the city council may or may not have a special meeting on the 23rd. I don't really know what the outcome of that, but the mayor wanted to call a
They're
special
having it.
workshop to vote, maybe vote on the ordinance. It wasn't very clear. Some of the councilors recommended that they wait and post it on a regularly scheduled meeting. I'm not sure if they have one more coming up in September, if they wanted it on the October agenda. And there was also concern about, with elections coming up, this potentially maybe getting passed off to the next council. So it seemed a little unclear as to whether or not the existing council wanted to vote. Some of them wanted to wait until the formation of the Agricultural and Resource Protection Commission for them to kind of take it forward and then move to the council when they're ready. So I'm not exactly sure what's happening with that.
Some also said they wanted to wait for the survey results.
Survey results,
Yeah.
right? So I guess we'll have to wait until maybe there's a special workshop on the city calendar. If you want to, as individuals, contact your counselors and ask for an update on that, you're more than welcome to. If I hear of anything, I can forward that along. But yeah, it's a little unclear as to where that stands. The debate survey has been finished. There was discussions about potentially having a joint meeting with planning boards so that those results could be presented to us. I haven't heard anything updated on that, so it's very much kind of up in the air, but I did go and I basically just paraphrased what we'd already written. Nothing had changed since then, so it's kind of, I'll let you know when I know more. But if there's any questions.
I had reached out too, and Francis did get back to me too, which a couple of you copied in too, that he's still compiling the data. But he reached out to Peter Crichton last night, and they're in conversation on how to best get that data out either to the public or post meeting. So we should hear something kind of soon. So.
Yep, other than that, the survey wasn't really discussed. They didn't want to open that can of worms, understandably, because that wasn't exactly the intention of the workshop. But it was, very well stated from the mayor that this was just kind of about data. He was trying to keep his personal opinions out of it. So again, I don't really know exactly what's going to happen with the survey. Hopefully, we'll find out more.
It was very well attended, I
But it
would
was very well
say.
attended, yep.
Everybody at this table was there.
Thank you for being there.
Yeah, and
I wish I had
thank-
been a little bit more strong in my
Yeah.
message, but.
No, I would just say thank you to Jordan. I thought you did a terrific job. I thought it was a very fair representation of what we discussed, and appreciate you doing that, because that was challenging environment.
Yes, it was a little
It's not
intimidating,
easy.
but it was a good, it was a good learning opportunity, on speaking, kind of on a little bit more of a charged topic. But it was a good opportunity to do that. I really appreciated it, going to speak there in person. Just reiterate again to both the council and public who maybe hadn't viewed the letter. Oh, and that's one more update. I have to coordinate with Audrey and see if our letter's on the Ag Hub yet. If it's not, I'll email her tomorrow and make sure that it is, and I'll CC you on that. Because I think that's something we mentioned in our joint meeting, but I hadn't followed up on yet, so I can do that.
Is it your perception that the planning board might be receptive to a joint meeting?
For the Bates survey results, I'm sure they would entertain the idea. Scheduling might be difficult, but I think it kind of is more dependent on, how the city, what works out with Peter Creighton, the city manager, and the Bates professor, and what they determine. I'm sure we can make it work if it's a joint meeting. Back in discussions, I remember, from our group at least, it might be preferable to not have two separate presentations, so that we're all getting everything at the same time and can have a joint discussion about it. So I think they would be open to having a joint meeting. So if that is presented with us as an option, we can discuss that. If,
I would strongly prefer a joint meeting, because I think that way we would have the benefit of the questions and discussions from the whole group.
Yeah.
And out of consideration for the public and for Professor Eanes, I think that would be, well worth it as well. I mean, I think, especially considering that we're talking about the agricultural resource protection zone, it would be well worth acknowledging that this is a particularly busy time of year for farmers.
Mm-hmm.
So to have rushed meetings on short notice that are difficult, times for people to get to, I think that makes it very complicated and is concerning to me.
Mhm.
So,
Especially we're getting into late harvest season here, so this is.
right. We'll see. I mean, again, I don't really know what's gonna happen with this proposed special workshop that the mayor had suggested, where they wanted to talk about how they may or may not vote on the ordinance changes, because if we don't view the Bates results before then, I'm not sure how they'll be factored in. Some of the counselors were receptive to the idea of, like I said, waiting until this other special, advisory commission is developed, in which case, the results could be factored in. So it's kind of all just contingent on one another and this special meeting and what the council plans to do, which I really don't know of yet. So, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to view the results of that survey before anything is decided on, but I just really don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
would
wish
hope
Tiz
that
was here.
the data from the survey would be available as soon as possible, regardless of what the council may or may not do, because I think it's important, as soon as the information is available, to get it out there so that people can have
I
the
agree.
benefit.
Absolutely.
Do you have any idea, I'm looking at you, Sam, but I don't know, has anybody talked to Francis Eanes about how he may wind up distributing the information? I mean, he has done it, so I guess it's, to some extent, it's up to him to decide.
Well, I think that
Whether
was
he
part
wanted
of-
to, because if there are multiple ways in which you could distribute it, whether you could put it in some kind of
Right.
report that you publish on a publicly accessible site. I mean, I think that's probably finally his call, or whether he wanted to still lead with a meeting where he actually gets to explain things.
Part of his
I would-
feedback today was that he was still willing to do a public, like he had been saying, and reaching out to Peter, he wanted to know if we thought that was a good idea or not. He was asking for our thoughts, but also he was waiting for Peter to get back to him.
I mean, I can't imagine it wouldn't be publicly available and or presented to at least the public, regardless of whether or not we're involved. So I'm sure it will be accessible to public in one way or another. I don't know what those avenues might be, but I'm sure regardless of whether or not we have this joint meeting and then it's officially presented to the Conservation Commission, I think it will be available to the public at least.
I think we also have to be conscious of the fact that Professor Eanes' information may not be as extensive as he hoped, because basically the mayor's statements and stuff basically has compromised it to a certain extent as far as participation is concerned, because I think there are my understanding that there are a number out there that basically, the landowner was confused, and essentially, whether the information was going to be utilized or not, so they just left the survey sitting on the shelf. And so I think, not being critical or anything, but being fair to the professor, I think we have to recognize that probably our response rate was compromised by mistakes.
I would say, I don't want to get into too many details, but I would withhold speculation about that.
So when I hear more about that, I will be sure to forward it along. I'm kind of not really directly communicating with Professor Eames because I think it's maybe best to not have the city manager do that. So I can ask the city manager if there's an update on that and provide you with anything that I hear. So moving forward, if everyone's comfortable with that update about last night's meeting, we do have work in progress subcommittee updates. There's Park and Cemeteries. I haven't heard anything from Tiz as she is traveling out of state right now. With the Lewiston Auburn Community Forest Board, Brianna, did you have any updates on that?
We've done some tree harvesting recently, and there will be some more being done this fall, mostly our birch and red oak. So if anybody's seen the tree farm that's out there.
And that's at the
it's doing
nursery?
Really good,
Okay.
yeah. So there's a lot of excitement.
Where they're taking from the nursery to plant.
Yeah, finally. So these are the first baby trees that have grown up on their own, have been big enough to transplant. We've had, as you know, between this summer and spring and then last year, deer kind of ravaged a lot of that. So part of what we're trying to do now is look forward on how we can deer-proof that area a little bit better.
And is the meeting already held or is it?
We have a meeting Thursday. If anybody wants to attend, 7 o'clock. This month, we meet at Lewiston Public Works. So we rotate back and forth and meet here.
Where is the nursery?
The community center on North Auburn Road there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you actually drive by, you can, if you look, when you go by the barn, you'll see one offset right behind the barn where the volleyball court type area. Keep driving down towards like Dan Bilodeau's house, you'll see another group of trees in that. So you got like the red maple, red oaks are like over here, and then the birch are gonna all, so they're a little segregated.
Thank you. We already kind of touched on the agriculture resource protection zone, updates for that. So LA Trails and Appetite Group.
Which are not officially our subcommittees, but just to update, we got the sign and kiosk that's gonna be going out, the city's still working on that. We decided to move the site, realized the site was great when we didn't put it in the ground, probably not the greatest idea. One of the public works guys said, hey, by the way, we pushed the snow this direction. So we came back and we said, oh my gosh. That should be up any day, it might be up now, I have no idea, I haven't been up there in a week, but that was that. We've got a lot of events going on up there, but it's nothing major as far as those two groups.
Thank you. And yes, good to clarify that those are not our groups, but we consider them work in progress and we kind of follow along with what they're doing.
We might want to put subcommittees as 5 and then work as progress as 6, so that they don't get confused as specific. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think at this point we do have quite a few subcommittees to kind of segregate those to their own sections. So, work in progress, 1, and subcommittee adjustments, I kind of like that. So I can restructure that next. Okay, so moving on to new business. Well, we didn't have any public comment at the time where we had that section, but we do have some public now. So if you have any general comments that we haven't addressed yet, or if you want to just keep listening along, either is fine.
I'm fine. I think we addressed a whole bunch of them last night.
Yes, there was quite a bit. All right, so moving forward into new business. Voting on officer roles. So Tiz isn't here. I'm not sure if we need full attendance. I mean, we can vote for him, but I don't know if.
What does the majority of the group want to do? Do you want to delay it 1 month, or do you want to vote tonight without his?
I'm comfortable waiting until Tiz is here. And then basically we'll just continue functioning with temporary appointments up there.
Okay.
So
It is.
Gotcha. All right, so we'll wait until October for that. We already discussed the timber harvesting ordinance in the shoreline zone, kind of in the work completed. So jumping down to the next one would be review the language for the agriculture committee. This was sent around with the agenda. I haven't heard in any official capacity for our input on this. Audrey mentioned it in our joint meeting last week that it was, sent to her, I think, to distribute to the planning board. I'm not sure if that's exactly what happened, but basically the planning board and conservation commission had the opportunity to review this. Like I said, have not been contacted in any official way for our input. Audrey just forwarded this to me, so we should review it. We have it, but I don't know when we're going to be asked to provide input on this. So.
Right. Do we know the status of like when it's going before?
No, like I said, I mean, no one's even asked me, sent this to me from, I don't know who would even be sending it to me, who's in charge of the group. I really don't know much about it. No one's contacted me. So I guess I would ask Sue, maybe. I can reach out to her and see if this is coming up on one of the agendas for city council. But other than that, I really don't know the timeline for this. So that's why I felt it was important enough to distribute and talk about at tonight's meeting, so we have the opportunity to.
Get some thoughts out.
Right.
Discuss
I
it.
believe that Councilor Lasagna is involved in drafting the language and is kind of spearheading that effort, so she might have an update on that.
If there are any thoughts, basically, we can convey them, we basically establish what they might be, as we did previously with the letter stars, and authorize Jordan, the chair, to speak in our behalf if it should surface.
Can you just clarify that, and what I would be doing?
Well, basically, if this group basically had some suggestions or strong feelings on there, I think, which we did have previously as far as residential members, to develop what they are, and then essentially
Sure.
authorize you to speak in our behalf
If approached. Okay.
if that's in service.
Sure, yeah. I
You
think
can
that's
give,
fine.
Holly Lasagna some feedback from
Okay.
Okay, I, for one, that was the biggest thing in this whole.
What?
I don't care about any of my other comments, but my big concern was I wanted to make sure that it was all Auburn residents. I don't like the verbiage. We have 9 members, which I think is a big group, and only 2/3. And then in the second part, or in the first part, that they'll make the highest priority given to selecting 5 or more. It doesn't say it will, it's just going to give the highest priority, which means if you don't have enough, they'll just take whatever applies. And in that bottom section, the qualifications, that 2/3. I don't like that. I really
Can I
think
ask
it
you
should
a
be
question?
more.
Does anybody know what was the rationale? I agree with you, I mean, I flagged it, and I just found myself wondering, what was the rationale? Because it seems,
The
is that
original
not unusual to
conversation.
have a city board? that
I think so, but part of the original conversation months ago about this was they were hoping to get more people that had, I want to say stakeholders, it's not really the word I'm looking for, just more expertise on looking at these, and not necessarily Auburn residents have those expertise that they wanted to seek outside the community. I agree that sometimes we don't have the expertise to sit on these volunteer committees, mostly because people don't volunteer enough, I feel sometimes, and those that do get burned out. But I believe very strongly that there is no reason why we can't, if we only find 5, we can have up to 9, just like we do when we work with few, and you have outsider expertise come and sit when you need them, but they're not a voting member. And I think that's the important thing, is that when this happens and quorums happen and we vote, we are all the Auburn taxpayers, we have the best interest, this is our ordinance, this is our municipality, and I don't want to see outside influence that heavily weighted on any committee in Auburn. So, to me, I don't see why we can't have it be Auburn residents, and then there's no reason why they couldn't have collected outside expertise.
It's no different than any other board that
We
has
have-
authority.
We have outside expertise all the time, you know? We're not all versed in all these things that we deal with. We pull in resources. We have the state come in, we have, you know, college professors, we have extra farmers come in. Everybody pulls in resources. But at the end of the day, I don't want this committee to end up turning over to like even a 7 to 9. That is a possibility. It says that it'll be given, you know, they will make highest priority given to 5 or more, but it doesn't really say that. It does say 2/3, but I've also seen the appointment committee, whether they did it on purpose is probably accidental, but not really paying attention on who submits to these committees. And they have accepted people that are not residents when the ordinance of that committee did say private resident.
So there are other committees that
Have in the
do
past.
not require everyone to be resident.
I think every committee is looking at that now. So
Every committee is looking at the potential to
And
allow
why? Some
non-residents.
ordinances are built in because they're quasi municipalities. So, you know, you like Auburn and water, sewer and stuff, that's just, you know, that's a
It's a
given,
different-
we have
yeah, yeah.
different stakeholders.
Mhm.
But something like this, where the focus is the ordinance and the research and the collaboration of how it affects Auburn, I see this as one of those committees that it really should be written in the verbiage in this ordinance that it's Auburn, moving forward.
I agree.
I'm a bit more ambivalent about it, in part because, you know, it's 2/3, so it wouldn't be that the people from outside Auburn would have the decision-making power as a majority at any point. You know, so certainly they could wield outsized influence over the committee through their positions. I could see that. I mean, I can certainly see the reason for concern, but I also think, you know, for a committee like this, it would be really helpful to have outside expertise that is involved on a regular basis, if they can actually get that. And in practical terms, I find it difficult to believe that they would actually ever get so many outside people who would be coming to this, that would be such an issue. I mean,
Well, I mean, you look at, for example, I mean, at these outside qualifications, let's say those 3rd, okay? It's really not specified exactly what their role would be, but if they were all planning development people.
Right,
you
how do we know, how
what
do we
if
know they're
they're-
an expert?
Right, so I hear what you're saying, loud and clear, I absolutely do, and I totally respect it, but on my sense, I'm thinking it doesn't define each person's role. So you have 9, you have 1 from city council, you have 1 that lives in the ag zone, you have 1. It starts to do that, it does. But when you talk about the 3rd that are gonna make up the non-residents, it doesn't really clearly define who those people are. It doesn't say that we're gonna have 1 person from maybe county commission or something looking at this, and 1 person's a agro-tourist developer.
Right, what do they define?
It doesn't
what
say
those
what those
three-
3rd people, those
What do
3rd
they-
people could.
right.
I mean, the truth is, it doesn't really define that for Auburn residents either. You know, we could have 3 people who are outside experts from the cooperative extension, you know, dream scenario, and 5 people who have votes who are residents of Auburn, who are pro-development, who are appointed by their buddies, who, you know, want them to be able to develop and authorize that. So it's an issue on both sides, I see.
But I agree with Sam from the standpoint of resource, but the other point I would raise is that there are certain, Auburn has certain attendance rules and that sort of thing, and most of your, many of your most capable resource people basically would not be able to attend every meeting. And essentially, I think, I would feel it would be wiser to go with, let's say, a specific standing advisory resource group that basically we could attract a higher level of expertise, because also you've got another factor, and that is many of your most capable and most knowledgeable as a part of their job are not allowed to participate in a voting capacity at the local level. So as if we should, and the Ag Resource Group basically has the authority to name either a resource group if they'd like to, or it could be mandated as part here, but basically, we could meet the point of you made, and basically, and I agree, Auburn residents, because we're the ones the most impacted, but basically, we could also attract the most capable resource people if we had them in a position where they could attend as the specific agenda topic might surface or as they desire. But basically would not be mandated and we would not be limited in drawing expertise or attempting to, that had to be there a certain number of meetings a year or that sort of thing, or that their job description, failed to allow them to participate.
But it does allow in this that they can create their own subcommittees.
Right.
So in those subcommittees, you can have outside expertise.
But, it could be done either way, either with them naming it or as a mandatory thing, which either one. But I think it addresses the point that Sam is making, and that is attracting outside expertise and drawing out outside expertise. But basically, by making them a voting member, we actually reduce the potential for the capability of the input.
I can see both sides to it. I can.
Yeah, I can
Does
too.
anybody else that we haven't heard from want to comment? Jane, you want to comment on anything?
Well, I mean, I guess in principle, it seems to me like probably a best idea to have it be all Auburn residents. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking because of their, what their stakeholders, they understand that is going to impact them. I get the point about having good recommendations from people who are experts. But I guess I don't know why you wouldn't just do that by drawing on them maybe as subcommittees or periodically as needed, rather than having them actually be on the committee.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be my inclination, and also for the reasons that you bring up, Morris, it's like those people may actually not be able to serve. But even before that, it seems to me just like if you're grappling with a question that's really complicated, why not just go out and ask the people who are best able to give you their expertise, but then finally it's the Auburn citizens who have to make the decision and take responsibility for making the decision.
But I would also think, we should look to non-resident landowners as being a part of that resource group, so that they would have an opportunity to contribute, but just would not have the vote. Right?
You could have alternate members, yes.
Right.
Could have alternate members.
I mean, I guess they would have, well, based on the way alternate members work, they could have voting capacity in the absence of a regular member. So if they're not Auburn residents and can't vote, then I'm not sure how that would work. But you could have standing non-voting roles in there. I'm not sure if that would be appealing though, if they can't ever vote on something. I think I'm trying to figure out how to say this best. There's a lot of discussion about, who's going to be on it, but in regard, when I'm looking at their powers and duties, it doesn't seem like there's really much authority anyway. So I guess I just kind of take issue with this whole entire thing because it feels like it's, I'm not trying to give any flack to who put this together, but it just feels like it was developed completely in isolation to all of the discussions that have been had on the ordinance itself. It feels like it's not even related to anything that anyone has brought up with problems with the ordinance, potential uses of this committee, like handling a case-by-case appeal process or being involved in that. I just feel like it almost seems like it was drafted just completely with ears closed to everything that's happened with the ordinance. So I think we're getting caught in the weeds, but for me personally, I really just take issue with a lot of things in this committee.
Yeah, we would like to see that they have a little more authority than what.
So
Well, I think, sorry, go ahead, Jane.
Well, I guess I was just gonna ask you, Jordan, I mean, I guess this is kind of playing devil's advocate, but it seems like, we're confronted with this kind of crisis around the ag zone right now, but you want to actually establish a committee that will be in for the really long haul, and so that you want them to have a certain kind of an ability to address particular situations, but you can't write the charge of the committee based on one kind of emergency situation.
Right.
I mean, I guess the thing for us to think about might be coming to the way this is written. Is there anything in the way it's written that would preclude them, like, doing what it seems like
Right.
maybe we're gonna ask them, somebody might ask them to do, which is to look at the situation of, I don't know, kind of gridlock that we're in and like help us figure out, isn't that part of what this group might be asked to do?
Mhm.
I mean, because we were just saying earlier, you know, if there's some thought that all of the recommendations won't be voted on by the city council, but would be passed on to this body, then that's the question, like, do we think there's something in the way the body's gonna be constituted
Right.
that would allow them to do that? Because otherwise, then you're kind of right, we're just creating, oh, let's create one more committee, and we still
Right.
won't be able to resolve our problems.
Yeah, I mean,
And that would
as,
be
as additional
unfortunate.
context to this, I share a lot of your concerns, Jordan, about where this has come to. I think earlier iterations were presented at a joint city council planning board workshop. And I think that version had a lot more authority, and there was real pushback from the council. So what I think is unfortunate is that we're just seeing this now and getting the opportunity to provide our feedback on it now. Because I think had we been able to provide that earlier, we might have been able to be another voice of support for a stronger committee, whereas I think now we're kind of coming to it late in the process, and any feedback that we provide might just hold up the creation of this committee, which would be my concern, because I think it's really important that it be involved in the current deliberations on what happens with the zone.
I think the formation of the group that put this together also was done really very slyly. Yeah, and hastily as well. I mean, I think initially with the original and true, I'll call it, ad hoc committee, one of their primary recommendations was to develop a permanent ag advisory board or whatever they're gonna call it. That was effectively swept under the rug and really put on the, it was just ignored, really. All of those recommendations were ignored. And the reason that this then started, I don't even know who they is, I don't know who selected the people to put this together, but I remember when they were doing this, calling Eric several times and saying, what's going on? Who were they selecting? Who's they? How can I be selected? How can, what's this process? And it was very difficult to get any real good information. And all of a sudden it was like, well, they are meeting Monday. It was very, I think, like I said, slyly done. I was glad that somebody was actually working on doing it because they were starting to hear us about pushing through that an ag commission needed to be in place. But I don't think this represents what the original recommendations were from the original ad hoc committee.
So can I ask, I guess this is actually a point of clarification on two items. One would be, it ought to be a matter of public record who actually was the committee that wrote this.
Yeah.
And I think I actually know some of the
Yeah.
folks
Yeah.
who worked on it, and so that seems like, and the person that I think I know, has certainly gone into it with goodwill
Yes.
and I think the best interest of the community at heart. And then the other thing, because I found myself wondering what the original, what's the name of that? Was that
The ad hoc, the ad hoc committee.
But there
was
was
the
also
original.
a cornerstone report.
Oh.
Or is that
That's the
something
one we
separate?
paid.
Blackstone?
Blackstone something.
No, the.
I was just
wondering,
wondering, was
I can't
there,
keep track of all the names.
Crossroads.
Crossroads. There's
Crossroads.
That's the $40,000 independent.
so I guess my question was, if they envisioned an ag committee of some sort, was there any detail
Yes,
in
there
that
was.
report of what was envisioned? That might be interesting to look at, because I look at this and it's kind of in a vacuum a little bit, looks like a committee.
Right.
Walks like a committee.
That's
It's
what I was
probably a
trying
committee,
to imply.
so, but it would be interesting to see if there was a different model and that, because it's, when you're comparing, you can kind of see what the different opportunities might be.
And I guess I'm frustrated because we submitted our final recommendation July 2nd of this year, saying, we would like to be involved in the formation of this, and like, it's September 17th, it has been already formulated after we submitted that request to be part of the process. And now we're kind of behind the ball where it's like, oh, this committee has to be formed because, you know, there was elections and, you know, this is kind of getting pushed through, so we want to have a committee, but I don't feel comfortable just kind of, you know, I would have liked to have been involved earlier in the process because I just don't feel comfortable kind of going with what this is. You know, it just feels like we really missed an opportunity, or we're denied an opportunity to provide feedback on the entire formulation of this. So I'm just a little frustrated in that sense, I guess, considering we requested this back in July and no one has even contacted me to date, and it's mid-September.
So I think that's a really good thing to flag and figure out what the process should be in involving the Conservation Commission in decisions that affect conservation. Because the other thing that came up before we even talked about or before you even presented last night and before the Ag Zone presentation took place was the matter about the solar farms, which we brought up at our last meeting. You know, I mentioned that I had heard through the grapevine that some of these things were being discussed. But I don't think that's ever been brought forward formally to the Conservation Commission, unless I'm mistaken. So it doesn't seem like there's any clear communication with us, and it's all up to the will of whoever would be taking that initiative. And I think they just don't think of us, or maybe they do, and don't really want to slow it down in committee, which is a perspective that some people have. So I would love to figure out, you know, what we can do as a group to advocate for ourselves on that a bit, because, you know, nobody's really doing it for us at this point.
Right, and I'm not sure what the protocol is for, you know, when they contact other committees or boards, like planning board, for example. I don't know what the process is if they think, you know, something's relevant to them, like, you know, this language. I don't know how or when they got a hold of it, but it just does feel like maybe there's not consistent communication when there's, you know, potential involvement from multiple committees, you know, especially in our
I think
regard.
you have to maybe step back and look at the whole picture a little bit, because basically, you know, there are conflicting objectives of different people or different groups are involved. But basically, the original Crossroads ad hoc group was named, and basically, this concept of a special ag committee basically was surfaced by them and recommended by them to basically promote roughly forest or agriculture and that sort of thing, and programs that basically would strengthen that sector of the economy. And so that was a primary focus of that. But essentially, as Michelle has referenced, essentially it sort of got swept under the rug, and the mayor's ad hoc committee was named, and essentially I'm not sure that those that supported the naming of it really supported all of the complications that surfaced in that group, because in the mayor's ad hoc group, essentially, the more they examined things, the more they recognized a lot of the unintended consequences that could occur, and it finally became a situation where within the mayor's ad hoc group, essentially it appeared to be recognized that a portion of the ad hoc group essentially was in sympathy with the objectives of the original Crossroads group, and another sector basically had a single focus of build houses, build houses, build houses. And so it became what could have been and was intended to be an economic growth option for Auburn, essentially became a political situation, became politicized. And so that's where I think we find ourselves right at this particular point, that hopefully events between now and the end of the year will basically at least partially extricate ourselves from some of the political dilemma. But I think, John is correct. Basically, it has appeared that any group or any individuals which basically were focused on something that was out of the mainstream essentially has gone unnoticed, and you can call it accidentally on purpose or just accidentally without any determination. But that's a little bit of the secret of the history, and I'm not personally familiar with the original ad hoc group recommendations, but that's my understanding, that essentially it was to promote the quality of forestry and agriculture and open space usage in rural areas of Auburn.
So if I can interject.
Sure.
I do believe that Joe has many, many references of current existing examples of strong agricultural commissions in other parts of our country. And he said a couple of times that there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, there already are perfect examples that are working in other areas. So,
And that's kind of
Winslow
where I
has
was
a great
coming from.
one. Winslow, Maine. We
Yeah.
don't have to go far. They have a really strong
I
committee.
saw the Winslow Maine one.
And that's where I was kind of coming from in my frustrations. I'd love to review other examples, but I just don't know, like I said, I still haven't been contacted, so I don't know what our timeline is. And I definitely don't want to set, kind of go back and redo work that was already done, but we were precluded from. So
Yeah.
we shouldn't be denied the opportunity to go through our own process because we were excluded from beginning.
Yeah.
So I would be open to reviewing case studies, and I think that's important. I'm just not sure how much of that has been done, and what the intended timeline is moving forward, or what our involvement will be. So I guess I'll have to contact. You said Councilor Lasagna is a good contact for that
Yeah.
status update. So I'll have to do that because I would love to kind of backtrack a little bit because it just feels we're coming into something already done.
That's right. Yeah,
Well,
and I think
Tracy,
that
you've got some notes of our discussion.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to be voting on anything, we can
Right.
continue that discussion and look outside and see what the game plan is before really making recommendations on this.
Right.
But
And I
at
was
least we
just-
can document some of our discussions, the first time we've even discussed it, like
Right.
you say.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to be voting on anything our first time discussing it, so I agree.
I was just gonna add, I don't know what the date was, but there was a joint meeting I mentioned earlier with the planning board and the city council where this was discussed, which got quite contentious, and I think the product of that is this, which has been stripped of some of the original clout of the initial proposal. So I think this is an attempt to reflect the realities of the feedback that came out of that
And maybe
council, and what can
compromise,
actually,
yeah.
it's a compromise solution, and it looks like a compromise,
Yeah.
truthfully.
Yeah, I would share that basically I was interested in the percentage of land ownership in the ag-resource zone, essentially, which, what portion might be held by non-resident and what portion might be resident. The city assessor tried, but didn't have the capability within her system to sort that through. So I took the liberty of contacting Francis because basically they had been the city had provided the names and addresses of all landowners in the farm and forest zone, essentially, so that he could mail out the survey. And Francis, the numbers I had back from Francis were just under 72% was owned by Auburn residents, which is greater than it's nearer a 75-25 ratio than it is to 1/3, 2/3. That's not a major item, but I'm just mentioning that as